أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. I've been told that this is effectively a warm-up act, so I'm going to take that into consideration. Now, it wasn't meant to be a warm-up act, to be honest with you. That's not what I was thinking. For me, this topic is very, very important, a vital issue at hand that is challenging all Muslims, or not just Muslims, anyone who has a religion. And that is the issue of Islam and the modern world, or to be exact, how to be Muslim in the modern world. This is a talk for those who care about what they think, what they believe, the values that they carry in their lives and how they engage with the world based on those values. What their state of heart is, their spiritual relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever cares about these elements, this is a very, very important topic. Why do I think it's so important? Because we all live in the modern world. And many of us innocently and naively interpret all the materialistic challenges that we face as purely something to do with dunya. What I want to try and make, the point I want to make tonight is that it's not as simple as that. At the heart of the modern world is the modernistic worldview. And of course, when I talk about the modern world, I'm talking about the world post-Renaissance period, like in the 16th century, when you had the Renaissance, and then you had the Enlightenment, then you had the Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, Industrial Revolution, French Revolution. The world that is shaped today based on these incidents, these events in Europe. And this is not something about the West. This is something about modernism, because modernism is global. West is Europe and America, whereas modernism is a philosophical worldview that is global now, and it affects everyone. So what I want to try and do is bring to people's attention the nature of the modern world. I'm going to talk today briefly about what modernism is, where we stand in the world today, how Islam encountered modernism, and what we can do as Muslims in today's day and age. So, we talk about and we lament about the social crises, the decline in the moral fabric of society. There are lots of wrongs going on in the world. But the problem is much deeper, much more profound than that. Traditional man, or pre-modern man, before he was put in a position where everything in life was questioned, he lived with a certain level of conviction, a certain level of certitude, that there was something beyond the physical reality that surrounded him. He lived in such a way that the material factors that surrounded him did not determine the decisions he made in his life and the values that he would carry in him. He lived and engaged with the world with this conviction. And this conviction of something, or this certitude that there's something beyond the physical world, gave him a sense to check, something to check his soul against, knowing that whatever happens here, he will be influenced, or it will influence his life when he passes away. That when he passes away, there was something else, a greater world waiting for him. So traditional man lived in the ambience of this certitude. And once this understanding, once the certitude was lost, all that was left for man was earth. And all the material needs that we naturally have, that we naturally seek, became the only thing to seek and the only thing to search for. It became, the world, dunya, became absolutized. Now, the crisis that we are facing is a spiritual crisis. That's fundamentally what it is. Many people try to solve the problems, the social problems, the moral fabric and the decline of standards and ethics in today's day and age. They try to solve it through politics, they try to solve it through social engineering, but you need to understand what the nature of the problem is, and the nature of the problem is that there is a very profound spiritual crisis. We have forgotten who we are, our nature. The spiritual crisis, it manifests itself most strongly in the sense that we have forgotten who we are and a sense of meaning. There is no more meaning in life. And with the loss of meaning is the loss of God. God is ultimately meaning. He gives purpose because He is the creator. So all that comes after Him has a purpose. By the loss of meaning we lose God. By losing God, we have lost the sense of the sacred. What is the sacred? I will be using this term throughout this presentation, inshallah. When I say sacred, I'm essentially referring to, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I will use the term sacred because this word, it gives meaning in life, because it basically allows the divine qualities of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to permeate through living. It gives life and human life meaning. So we say, for example, life is sacred. That means something, because we are intimately connecting Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with our closest, most intimate experiences. So I'll be using the term sacred, referring to Allah, referring to the divine, but in a more universal sense. So, the sacred, that sense of the sacred is lost when we lose God as a result of losing that meaning, purpose. When we lose God, we lose that sense of unity, that sense of the sacred and the unity. Unity which brought everything together. Before, you had disciplines like philosophy, ethics, the arts, literature, science, urban planning, all the various aspects of human life. They were connected in the traditional life. But as a result of losing God and losing that unity, that interconnectedness of the various dimensions of human life has been lost. And now we are left with a sense of separation. All aspects of life have been separated. And one of the strongest outcomes of this loss of interconnectedness of things is the loss of meaning. With the loss of meaning, loss of God. And one of the outcomes, another outcome of loss of God, is a loss of connection with nature. This is a very subtle point, which I think very few Muslims think about and talk about, but which is very, very intimately connected within the Islamic revolution and the spirit of Islam. Nature is not ours. It is not. We do not own it. It is God's creation. The mystics often refer to the cosmos and nature as a book of the cosmos. Its author is the same author as that of the Quran. It has many, many messages in it. Unfortunately, we are not able to read these messages because we have lost this sense, a sense of the qualitative dimension to life. So with the loss of nature, with the loss of God, we have lost that sense of unity, lost the sense of the sacred, a loss of connection with nature. Nature has become an it. It has become desacralized. With the desacralization of nature, we feel we become alienated. It is one of the strongest outcomes of the loss of the connection with nature. You see society now, you see especially in cities, urban dwellings, they are nothing but concrete jungles. This is an outer manifestation of an inner crisis. This is a very fundamental point, a very subtle point but people really need to understand. It's no accident that in the Quran, of all the sacred scriptures, and this is, I'm saying this not from myself as a carpet statement, but based on this is what is being said by authorities on comparative religious studies, which is of all the sacred scriptures in the world, the Quran, next to the Tao, the Cheng, I think, the Tao, next to the Tao, the Quran has the most references to nature. أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ ضَرَبَ اللَّهُ مَثَلًا كَلِمَةً طَيِّبَةً كَشَجَرَةٍ طَيِّبَةٍ. There's a very famous ayah. Do you not see the parables that Allah sets forth to you? A goodly word is like a goodly tree. And the ayah continues. This is one simple but one of the many ayahs in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to nature as a way to connect with Him and to understand the nature of things. And of course, when I say nature, I don't just mean the meadows, not just the sky, the trees. I'm talking about our biological nature within ourselves, our biological system. We have lost connection with all that. And there has been a very profound alienation of the individual in society. If we want to resolve this dilemma, we have to understand the nature of the world that we are in right now. Now, as a result of the alienation from God, as I said, there is an alienation of man from society, and as a result, the society slowly begins to fall apart. You know, go ask any people, ask any elderly person here. There was a much stronger community spirit. For example, even here in London. But with the economic rise of cities, there is a strange but very strong isolation of people. And that's why, for example, Sweden, which is one of the most highly developed economies in the world, also has one of the highest levels of suicide rates. Yes, it does get dark out there, and that may have something to do with it, but there is a very strong connection, statisticians will tell you, there's a strong connection with economic development and suicide rates, because we become detached. We lose a sense of belonging. Now, traditional man, well, before going to traditional man, we can say that what happened, how did this crisis form? In a sense, you can say this crisis was formed because man had lost his sense of a center. Traditional man always had a center. Wherever you went, whichever culture, whichever civilization it was, and however this center was articulated, be it an omnipresent being, the supreme consciousness, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whichever civilization was there, there was a sense of the center. And with that sense of the center, it gave man a sense of belonging. With the sense of the center, people had an origin. We all had an origin. We all knew where we came from. We all knew that our actions had a consequence, and we all knew where we were going. Our ancestors, the two fundamental parameters, the two fundamental points of reference that our ancestors lived by over the millennia was the sense of the center and the origin. And now this sense has been lost. So we can see that this is the state that we are in right now. Now, what is interesting is how did Islam, how did the world of Islam, which has a 1400-year civilizational history, a very, very incredibly rich heritage, intellectual, spiritual, artistic heritage, incredible heritage, how did it get from that point to where we are now? In order to address this question, I need to take a step back and go into a bit of history. Islam, when it was first formed, of course, we came from the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. At the heart of Islam, you can say, is quite the opposite of the modern worldview. Whereas in modernism, everything that is sacred is opposed. And in the modern world and the modernistic philosophy, God is taken out of the center of the universe and is replaced by man. In Islam is exactly the opposite. Everything in the Islamic universe orbited and revolved around the sacred. If existence could be symbolized with a spy circle, the sacred was the center of that circle in the eyes of the Muslims. And the circumference was dunya, our everyday lives. Yet there was a connection between the center and the circle. The center, which was the sacred, was the focal point of the Islamic civilization and the religion of Islam itself. And the civilization of Islam was basically, you can say, a commentary on this understanding of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the sacred being at the center of everything. All aspects of life, be it urban planning, be it architecture, be it art, literature, the sciences, medicine, spirituality, all revolved around the sense of the divine as intimately involved in all aspects of human life. Now when Islam went out of Arabia and it came out like a thunder, it's one of the most remarkable events in history, where within 81 years, within just over 80 years, Islam began with just a few people in the city of Mecca, all the way south of Spain, the south of Spain, all the way across to Western China. And unlike other civilizations, like the Mongols, for example, well, Mongol wasn't a civilization, they were barbarians, they expanded remarkably fast. But unlike them, Islam, wherever it went, even till today, you can see its presence in all areas around the world. So Islam expanded. And when it left its homeland, it was confronted with many, many challenges. All of a sudden, you have Muslims facing Byzantines, Romans, Greeks on one side of the planet, one side of the world, sorry. And on the other side, you've got the Indians, you've got the Chinese. These are very different civilizations, very different worlds. And the Muslims encountered all these different ideas, all these different thought patterns, these ways of living. Now, it's interesting that Sahif al-Sajjadiyya, written by Imam Zain al-Abidin, if you read the introduction to it, Shaheed al-Sadr, rahmatullah alayhi, says that one of the purposes behind Imam Zain al-Abidin writing Sahif al-Sajjadiyya was because at the time Muslims were exploring new lands and new worlds. And there was a concern, a real concern, that by exploring these worlds they may be affected, their faith may be affected. So Imam Zain al-Abidin wrote these very, very profound du'as to help people remember their spiritual heritage, their spiritual principles in life, so within the Islamic universe, and so not to be led astray once exploring these different worlds. The Muslim community was facing such challenges, and they came out remarkably, remarkably well. Before I continue, I just want to clarify one thing. Some people may notice that I may get a bit philosophical. I just want to clarify, it's not because I'm boring, and it's not because I don't have a sense of humor, and it's not because I'm detached from society, or I don't know what's going on in the real world. It's quite the opposite. Because this problem, because the spiritual crisis and the crisis of modernism is so profound, if we really want to understand what's going on, we have to dig deep. Okay? So, be patient with me if you see me come across as a bit philosophical at times here and there, okay? It's just, there's a reason for it all, okay? I'm not a boring guy. Anyway, so the Muslims, when they encountered these civilizations, what did they do? How did they deal with it? It's a very similar challenge to what we're facing now. It was secularism, all right? Ideas that are alien to the Islamic spiritual worldview. Muslims have been facing it. What did they do? First thing they did, or in summary what they did, was that they welcomed these intellectual challenges, these different forms of being. They welcomed them. And what they did was that they selected certain aspects of other civilizations that may not have been specifically mentioned in hadith and in Quran, but it confirmed Tawheed. It confirmed the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Classic example of this is Greek philosophy. Anyone going to Hausa now will be taught the rules of logic by Aristotle, or the theory of ideas by Plato. These are classic philosophers, Greek philosophers. The Muslims adopted these ideas, and it is a startling fact, but there are more books on Aristotle and his commentators in Arabic today than there are in the English language. And we're talking about the books in Arabic that have survived over 1,000 years by the Muslim intellectuals like Ibn Sina, Al-Biruni, Ikhwan Safa, all these different Muslim thinkers and scientists. It's a remarkable fact, and when I came across this, I was absolutely gobsmacked. You know, there are more books on Aristotle in Arabic than there are in English. It's a fact. But it's a classic example of how Muslims, when they encountered other civilizations, they incorporated different ideas within their worldview, but they didn't take everything. Greek, we're talking about the Greeks. The Muslims, if you look at Arabic literature over 1,000 years, you don't find anything to do with Greek tragedies or Greek plays. Why? Because, as the Muslims saw it, it's based on lots of gods. This is a polytheistic idea. It is alien to the Islamic worldview. So the Muslims didn't incorporate it. The Muslims knew about Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey, the famous poems by the Greeks, but it was not incorporated within the Islamic literature, within the Islamic arts. So the Muslims, when they encountered other civilizations, they welcomed, they embraced different ideas as long as these ideas confirmed and reaffirmed the reality of La ilaha illallah and the oneness of God. So, this was Islam's first encounter with alien ideas. Now let's fast forward a good few hundred years. How did we get from that point to here? In summary, and can I make another point? This talk is hugely simplified. Really simplified. I'm not an expert on this subject. I'm not an academic, I'm not an authority. I've come across knowledge that I think would be beneficial for everyone. And there is a lot to this subject than what I'm saying right now. But I really believe that this issue about Islam in the modern world is crucial for every Muslim to be aware of. And so I just want to introduce this whole issue to the community so that we can possibly think about it in the future. Anyway, so going back to the subject, how did we get to this point? In summary, and in very brief, you can say it was a result of the colonialization of the Muslim lands by Europe. How did this happen? This happened gradually. Whilst in Europe a new power was being formed, especially after the Renaissance, while a new power was being formed and new ideas were being brought about in Europe, the Muslims, being as intellectually and militarily and economically powerful as they were, didn't care. For the simple reason that Europe, for centuries, they were in the Dark Ages. They were effectively living in caves. You have Muslim cities where you have public bathrooms. You have public dwellings. You have Muslims and Jews and Christians sitting together in cafes and discussing about different issues about God. This is like 1,000 years ago. And in Europe, the kings of Europe were counting the fleas that are flying around them, naming them, because this is all they had in their lives. Okay, they lived in a very impoverished civilization, the Europeans. So the Muslims didn't care what was going on in Europe. But in Europe, there was a new power being formed. As a result of this power, one of the first outcomes was a very strong naval force, especially by the Spanish and the Dutch. After the 16th century onwards, they started to control more of the seas, which was a vital form of trading for the Muslims, especially Southeast Asia. So the Europeans started to cut out the economic trade routes, especially on the seas, of the Muslims. But the Muslims didn't care. The reality really struck them when, for the first time, the Europeans invaded the Muslim lands. And this happened in 1798 with Napoleon Bonaparte when he invaded Egypt. And this event sent shockwaves through the Muslim lands. Because for the very first time, the whole Dar es-Salam was being challenged. Muslims felt that there's something fundamentally went wrong in their lives, in their civilization. What was going on? They were trying to interpret this in a cosmic level, at a cosmic level. They felt that something, metaphysically went fundamentally wrong. As a result of this colonialization, the Europeans, of course, they went in, they started to study the Muslims, the Arabs, not just the Arabs and the Muslims, but the Far East, and you had the study of Orientalism developing, for the purpose, of course, of dominating over these lands. Anyway, there was a reaction by the Muslims as a result of this occupation. This reaction is a story that we are living through ever since the early 18th century. Sayyid Hussein Nasr, who is one of the leading authorities on the relationship between Islam and the West, Islam and modernism, categorizes the reaction of the Muslims against this colonialism, this new foreign power, in three ways. Number one of the reactions was that Muslims felt the reason why this happened to us was because we are not being good Muslims, so we have to be good Muslims. There's no point in philosophizing, there's no point taking art and architecture from different cultures and building on that. This is what has brought us to our downfall. What we need to do is we need to see exactly how the Prophet lived and just live like that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give us tawfiq. And this is the start of Wahhabism. This is the birth of Wahhabism. So this is one reaction. Another reaction, interestingly, is what has been termed as Mahdiism. Because, of course, amongst all Muslims, the Mahdi, Sharif, is a reality, it is a truth. Different Muslims interpret the idea of the Mahdi in different ways. But there was a sudden rise in Mahdism. Lots of people all of a sudden declared themselves as the Mahdi. And they waged war against the European powers, the French and the English. The most famous of these Mahdis was Muhammad Ahmed, or the Mahdi of the Sudan, where towards the end of the 19th century, he challenged the British, and he was very, very successful, remarkably successful. But his success was short-lived, and Lord Kitchener, who was commanding general at the time, killed Muhammad Ahmed. And apparently, I read this years ago, I don't know exactly how true it is, but when he killed Muhammad Ahmed, he cut his head off, and he sent his head as a gift to Queen Victoria. So, the second reaction was Mahdism, and the third reaction, which is one of the most prevailing ones, is modernism in Islam. Modernizing Islam. Muslims saw that Islam of today is the Islam of the 7th century. It doesn't bear any relevance anymore. We need to rethink. We need to rethink how to be Muslim. We need to rethink how Islam should be in light of the modern world. And so you had these intellectuals, so-called intellectuals, who were at the outcome of the colonialism of Europe on the Muslim lands. These people were very few, but they had a very big impact. These very few people became westernized Muslims, living in India, living in Iran, living in Iraq. They were educated in a Western way, and they were one of the very few people that did so. But the European powers gave them the power and to rule over the Muslim lands. And that tradition has continued ever since. With the westernized Muslims ruling the Muslim lands, they implemented secular rule. They implemented secular law, secular lifestyle, pop culture, all these things. Today, in the Muslim lands, you see is the legacy of the colonialism and the implementation of, the enforcement, the coercion, the enforcement of secular ideas into the Muslim lands. Why did the Muslims 1200 years ago or 1400 years ago, when they encountered secularism the first time, why were they successful? And why were we so unsuccessful? There is the opinion, the prevailing opinion, which is that over the last few centuries, Muslims had lost their intellectual heritage. They started to focus more on fiqh and sharia, and they've forgotten about the Islamic sciences, the nature of things, metaphysics, philosophy, the arts, and integrating, like I said earlier, the various aspects of human life into one vision of La ilaha illallah. This intellectual effort was very powerful, and we have a remarkable heritage, amazing heritage. Even though not much of the works have survived, but the works that have survived, they're amazing. So, effectively what happened is that we had lost our intellectual traditions. Muslims became lazy. They started to focus more on fiqh issues, and I'm not downplaying the significance of fiqh and sharia, but when you focus purely on this and forget other areas of human life and other dimensions of human experiences, then you end up with a vacuum. And this is exactly what happened in Europe, which led to the Renaissance and the secularization of life and so on and so forth. Now, unfortunately, I had to miss a lot of parts of this talk for the sake of timekeeping, but I'm going to try and conclude now. I'm going to say, what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is that many of us Muslims, we engage with the modern world, we engage with life, yet we are unaware of the secular and alien ideas that are deeply, deeply embedded in all aspects of modern life. We are unaware of it. We are innocently, naively engaging with everything. But we have to understand that the heart of modernism, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to talk about what the essence of modernism is, but at the heart of modernism is rejection of anything that is sacred. Anything of a qualitative nature, anything of a metaphysical nature is considered irrelevant and insignificant. This is the heart of the modernistic worldview. The modernism, the philosophy of modernism is what shaped so much of the world that we live in today. So we have to understand the nature of modernism. There's the heart of Islam is incompatible with the heart of modernism, and the two cannot be wed. One opposes anything sacred, whereas the second reaffirms and confirms, and actually was brought in the first place to reaffirm the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to understand that living in the modernistic world today, the modern world today, we can't be just naive and innocent about it. Okay, we have to have an idea, an understanding of what is going on around us. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy theory, and I'm not saying that we have to avoid anything that is modern. I'm not saying that we don't use technology. I'm not saying we don't use medicine. There's a difference between having a modernistic lifestyle and being contemporary. Being contemporary means in today's day and age, we are in this day and age, we have certain tools that we can use to our advantage. But there's that, and there's adopting and purely accepting the modernistic way. Because modernism is so focused on the human being and not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inevitably it entices the lower passions of the soul, and this becomes very appealing. And we see this in all aspects of life today. Anything from the media we engage with, to the entertainment, to the science, to the ethics that we try to live by, to the moral fabric of society today. There is a very strong emphasis on the human being. And this entices the low passions naturally. And so therefore it becomes very, very appealing naturally. So in light of this, we need to keep in mind, of the spiritual universe that we come from. There's a very beautiful ayah which says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, alaykum anfusakum, la yadurru man dalla idha ihtadaytum. O you who believe, guard yourselves, protect yourselves. He who errs cannot wrong you if you are rightly guided. We as Muslims today are facing tremendous challenges in all aspects of life. And although we may not be able to change everything straight away, the least we can do right now is to guard ourselves, guard our souls. If we are aware of the world around us, the nature of the world around us, then maybe this could be a simple step towards preventing other things from affecting our souls and bringing us down further and further away from heaven. Some of the things that we can do as Muslims today is, first and foremost, we must not lose faith. I don't know if it came across, I wish I had more time to elaborate, but unfortunately I ran out of time. To elaborate on the poverty of the modernistic worldview in light of the Islamic understanding of things. We have to appreciate that there is something very, very, very shallow. We have to remember this. So we have to, in light of this, why should we lose our faith? When I was learning more about the nature of modernism and the modern world, I was really shocked at how I felt intimidated by so many of the intellectual challenges posed by scientists and philosophers and politicians to Islam. I was quite surprised. Yet when I saw the shallowness of it all, I realized, why should I compromise my faith? Yet many of us Muslims are losing faith, because we seem to innocently believe that what's going on, the world around us is the truth. How can we avoid such strong rational arguments, and so on and so forth? Do not lose faith. There is a very, very, modernism corrodes the soul, and especially materialism corrodes the soul, which is such a strong pillar of modernism. We need to be intellectually informed. I'm not saying we all have to be philosophers. Everyone has their own level, but we all need to be aware. Ignorance is not tolerated in Islam. We have to remember that. We need to try and live in a more ethical and moral way within the Islamic values and Islamic morals. That includes, for example, being more cautious about how these different sexes interact, to the language that we use, to how we treat others. You know, the strongest form of da'wah is akhlaq. It really is the strongest form of da'wah. And if we appreciate the wisdom and the heart of the Islamic religion, the heart of Islam, and if we carry this in our lives, this can have a profound impact on those who surround us. More importantly, I believe we need to create a space around us. We talk about, you know, we're all surrounded by media and music. Okay. We're all surrounded by music and different forms of entertainment. We need to try and create a space around us which nurtures an ambience of Islam. I'm talking, you know, this can be done in different ways. You know, there's a world of difference it can make a world of difference by having a traditional piece of Islamic art in your room, or dressing in a certain way, not like tight clothing, guys wearing tight clothing, okay, dressing like women effectively, you know, is very, very problematic. But the way we dress, which is the closest thing to our souls, you can say, okay, is the clothes that we wear, the way we adorn our bodies. If we are more careful about that, this can help create an ambience, as well as, of course, dua. These days, these last days are very, very special, very, very, very special. This can help us nurture an Islamic spirit about us. Doing dhikr, we are forgetful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the nature of being in dunya. We need to be more remindful of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and doing dhikr, which nurtures the soul. There are many areas, but creating a space in our lives is very important, as well as being intellectually aware and living life as Muslims properly. In the end, the destiny of Islam and the West, not the modern world, I'm talking about the West, Islam and the West, we are both victims of the modernism. The destiny of both these civilizations is intertwined as a result of the spiritual crisis of modern man. And Islam, this is one area that Islam can play a huge role in, because we have not yet lost our faith. We may be losing our intellectual heritage, but we have not lost our faith. And if we can somehow Islamize knowledge, you know, these secular ideas that are surrounding us, if we can somehow Islamize it, integrate it within the Islamic worldview, and show the West how to remember their spiritual heritage, because the West, you know, they're very Christian. There was very strong spiritual heritage in the West for a long time, before it was lost through modernism. We can help them remember of their spiritual heritage, and therefore try and resolve some of the huge global issues, the deep psychological issues in societies, the moral breakdown in societies, the profound environmental and ecological crisis, the wider disparity between the rich and the poor, and the growing level of injustice, the incredibly powerful technologies that are so destructive. They have the power to destroy the world many times over. The world is facing many challenges, and so we need to be mindful of where we come from and how, you know, we need to remember our origin and the center that we came from. It all comes from the individual. There's a beautiful ayah which says, "Inna Allah la yughayyiru ma biqawmin hatta yughayyiru ma bi anfusihim." Verily, Allah will not change the conditions of a people unless they change that which is in themselves. It all begins with the individual. And there's a nice saying by Gandhi, which complements this ayah, where he says that you have to be the change that you want to see in the world around you. Islam is a living religion. It connects us to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It binds us. And that is fundamental element of being human. And so on that note, we do need to remember our tradition, our religion, our spiritual principles. And I'll conclude with a very simple but very profound hadith by the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where he said, "Qulu la ilaha illallah wa tuflihu." Say, there is no reality but the divine reality, and you will be victorious. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين.
Brother Ali, thank you very much for your interesting and insightful